Every year, as we're brought to the events of Holy Week from Palm Sunday to Good Friday, the question always hangs overhead: what caused the shouts of the crowds to change so drastically? From the cheers of Hosanna and joy welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, to the shouts of crucify him as they would send him to the cross on Good Friday. Scholars and biblical intellectuals have debated this throughout the centuries. Some have speculated that the crowds that were at the gate to the entrance of the city of Jerusalem were those people who had traveled with him from the region around Galilee. They had seen his miracles. They had heard his teachings. They knew who Jesus was, and as he was finally making it to the holy city of Jerusalem, they were cheering and rejoicing. But the crowds that were there on Good Friday, they weren't the same people. They were the residents and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So they didn't know Jesus. They had a fear of the unknown, and in doing so, they were able to be persuaded to shout, "Crucify him, crucify him." Other scholars have hypothesized that the crowd that had welcomed him when he entered into the city and was there during the week but didn't do what they expected. In other words, he didn't become this worldly king who overthrew the authorities and took control of everything. Well, then they, in their fickleness, turned against him because he had disappointed them. I guess we're never really going to know exactly what happened with the crowds until we're standing before God in heaven as we're meeting with the Almighty eternally. But the one thing that's very clear to us is that sin and temptation preyed on the fears and the anxieties of the crowds during those events of Holy Week and eventually put Jesus on the cross. Yet that which was intended to bring about defeat and darkness is that which gives us hope and joy, because God took that situation which seemed to be so bad and turned it into that moment of healing, hope, and eternity for us. Now, it shouldn't surprise us, that fickleness of the crowd and the ability for them to be manipulated so that they would shout, "Crucify him," by the time Good Friday comes along, because the persuasion of crowds and manipulations of emotions has been going on throughout human history. Just look at some of those stories that we love from the Bible. You think about Noah. Noah and his family were mocked and chided by the crowds as they saw him building this ark in the middle of nowhere and collecting the animals, so much so that it deafened their hearing, that they couldn't hear the calls of repentance that God was reaching out to them to bring them back home, bring them back to faithfulness. And it was just a few Israelites who thought it might be a good idea to build a golden calf to worship, and eventually almost the majority of all the Israelites fell to idol worship, bringing the wrath of Moses down upon them. Now today, we have social media and fake news and public shaming and isolating the abnormal. And we also have that fear-mongering that goes on through selective editing that's used to persuade crowds and generate fear and affect public sentiment and public attitude. And if you're one during this battle against the coronavirus who's watching the news every day and the updates and the conferences every single day, you might now be living in the fear that your own personal demise is just outside your front door. You might think that if you step outside and you turn the corner, there it is, you're going to get coronavirus and you're going to die. I mean, after all, the news reports that we hear are not reports about all those who are recovering, but they pick those sensational examples of those who have died and put them on the front cover of the newspapers and the lead stories as we turn on the news. And we hear over and over again of those who are testing positive for the coronavirus, but we never get an update on their condition, and we never hear how they are dealing with the symptoms or whether or not they have been healed. So during this Holy Week, this Palm Sunday, where we ask the question again of what affected the attitude and the shouts of the crowd, I thought it might be good for us as we continue to live in this changed and different world because of the coronavirus, to just take a few moments to look at some of the realities of the things that we're dealing with. As we hear of the numbers that are increasing each and every day with the coronavirus throughout the world, the facts still remain the same, that the percentages of those who have gotten the virus and have survived are well over 90%. And most of them get mild or somewhat severe cases and recover and are okay. And even though the numbers are going up, there are over 1 million people now confirmed in the world to have contracted the coronavirus. The death rate has remained basically the same everywhere you go and everywhere you look. It's 5% or less. And in the last few days, there has been more and more evidence generated that has led us to believe that the virus has been around longer than since we've known what to call it. It may have been around in December and January and early February, and many thousands of people probably contracted the virus and went through the sickness but didn't know what to call it, and they recovered it, and they're healed, and everything is okay now. And so knowing that even reduces the mortality rate even more. So don't live in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Because if you do what's recommended, you follow social distancing guidelines, wash your hands, don't touch your mouth and your face when you go out in public, the odds are in your favor that you are going to be okay, even if you get the virus. And don't immerse yourself in the news. Check it once a day maybe, just get an update on things, but don't become obsessed with it. And accept that at least for the next month, this is our reality and there's nothing we can do about it. So accept it and make the best of the situation. Yes, it is okay to mourn that things are different, mourn the things that you have lost, but then turn it around and look at how you can be blessed through the situation and in these circumstances. And most importantly, don't worry about the things that you cannot control. Everyone right now is struggling financially. And everyone's life is vastly different than it was 3 weeks ago. And the best way we're going to get through this, and really what Holy Week is all about, is being connected. So while you're at home, connect in new and different ways with those who are closest to you. And take the time and find the beauty through the miracle of technology to connect to those people maybe you haven't connected to in a while. Reach out to that relative, to that neighbor, to that friend that you only see at weddings and funerals. And remember those who are alone and reach out to connect to them. But most importantly, connect or reconnect with God. There is no better time than when we are in the midst of the storm to connect to the one who calms the storm. After all, when you listen to the Passion, when you think about what this journey of Holy Week is all about, it's all about connections. As Jesus was in the midst of the storm of the betrayals and everything else that he knew he was coming, he connected with his closest apostles as he gathered at the Last Supper. And as he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he was getting ready to pray, he asked to be connected, that they stay awake with him and watch. And ultimately, Jesus was disconnected from God the Father in heaven as he hung on the cross for a brief moment, so that we could be eternally connected to God and to one another. So in the midst of this weirdest of all Holy Weeks that we're about to experience, and even though we are disconnected because of sickness and sin, we remain connected in this most wonderful way. And by our connection, we are reminded that that grace and that love of God continues to strengthen us and feed us and keep us in that hope that is eternal. And when this is all over, our cries of isolation will be turned together to shouts of joy and healing. Amen.